Come back now to the panel in the studio to discuss where all of this leaves the parties and indeed more broadly the state of our democracy. I mean, first let's start off with those European Parliament elections. Nick was saying earlier that they hope to do a deal, Jeremy Corbyn and Theresa May, so that they can go into them with something concrete. Do you think that would change the dynamic?
Change the dynamic of Euro elections? I mean, certainly, if a deal was secured, I mean, they'd be off, wouldn't they? So that would change quite a lot. I mean, the chances...
No, that may not be possible. That was Nick's advice, just in terms of the process that's now underway. But yes, I guess that's one possibility, is that the elections are off. But if they continue, would a deal help them, do you think, on the doorstep? Or be toxic?
That's really interesting. I mean... there's the issue that obviously Labour membership is overwhelmingly pro-Remain, wants a public vote, wants basically just to stop Brexit. That's the main priority for the majority of Labour members. Now, that activist base is very important to get out the vote, to go door knocking. Labour really relies on those activists. So to lose them, or if they're dispirited, that would play into it, the Labour vote there.
Suzanne, how do you think, if they were able to initial a deal before the European elections?
Look, we've had a Prime Minister who has said, hundreds and hundreds of times that we were going to leave the European Union on the 29th of March. A Prime Minister who said that no deal was better a bad deal. Apparently she was talking in the abstract, whatever that means. People don't trust her anymore. People don't trust politicians. We've just seen that in this election. Whatever deal they come up with, if people can go to the ballot boxes and vote during the European elections, they're not going to trust anything either Labour or the Tories tell them. Whatever deal they come up with. Nigel Farage's Brexit party has getting huge momentum. I've seen polls this week where he's polling 40% for the European elections. That's not going to go away overnight. The trust has gone. It's going to take a long time to get back. Are you personally going to support the Brexit Party in the European elections? Yes, I will. I mean, you know, Nigel's been pretty ghastly to me at a personal level, but yeah, I'm going to vote for him because I want to get out of the European Union, and there is no other choice.
What effect do you think it'll have on the Tories then? Because obviously that was an element that wasn't there yesterday, the Brexit Party.
I mean, it's going to be a wipeout for the Conservatives. I mean, there is no way this is going to go well for them. And like I said earlier on, it is probably going to be another referendum by proxy, which is looking like the Lib Dems now as a proxy for the Remain vote. That wasn't clear before the local elections. There was a debate over whether it was going to be Change UK or the Greens, but it looks like it will be the Lib Dems versus the Brexit Party, who have done incredibly well at establishing themselves and establishing their brand. Now, if the Conservatives did manage to get a deal together with Labour, I think that's probably unlikely, even though the talks are going along, but it doesn't feel likely to be moving in that particular direction that fast.
And I think...
Sorry, Polly, are you as confident as Laura is that you will be the choice for the Remain voter, or will Change UK...
I'm not standing,
the party? But
will
Change UK complicate that equation also?
I think it's certainly complicated because there's going to be all of these parties with a Remain platform on that ballot paper. But because the Liberal Democrats did so well in the last 24 hours, they've got a case to make, and the Liberal Democrats have a sort of, history of slightly ludicrous bar charts that they put on all their leaflets. And so there will be very strong messaging that says if you want to tell, send the message that you want to Remain, then the Lib Dems are the way to do it. But it will be messy and complicated. But of course, there will also be Leavers who vote for UKIP, Leavers who vote for the Conservative Party, Leavers who do all sorts of things. I think if the Labour and Conservative parties do somehow cobble together a deal, I think that would actually probably bring their vote share down, because it would inevitably be a slightly softer Brexit type deal, which would upset those residual Leavers who are still sticking with the Conservative Party. And it would mean that Jeremy Corbyn had just accepted that he was going to somehow pull through a Tory Brexit, and that would mean those Labour Remainer votes would probably want to lend their voice to the Liberal Democrats. So I think, therefore, the long-term political interest of them is to actually keep us in this holding pattern where they're pretending to discuss, eating a lot of biscuits and not getting anywhere.
I disagree with that, because I think that actually the Conservatives are being hammered because they're not doing something. Theresa May has been very clear that she wants to get this withdrawal agreement through. That's her version of leaving the European Union, and we've not been able to do that to now. Labour, as these these results have shown, are actually getting held accountable for that as well. So I think that their position thus far, which has been to try and straddle both horses, has been quite successful for them. But I think that's now reached the end of the road, and they need to make a decision one way or the other. And the longer that they don't do that, the longer that they lose votes from both sides.
But it comes back to that point Peter Carr was making in the film, which is that actually deciding which side of the road they're going to stand on will lose them more votes from one group or the other.
Would you share the view, Sonia, that I've seen some Labour supporters voicing today, that their position hasn't helped them in the Brexit voting north, and therefore it's not gaining them anything?
I mean, that's difficult. A lot of Labour Remainers are saying, well, if Labour's Brexit policy isn't strong enough to get those leavers out in the north, then why have it at all? But obviously, those voters see Labour as a Remain party. That's why they're not going out for Labour in those areas. So it seems a bit of a flawed argument to me.
Is assuming that the European elections happen and are as bad for the two main parties as we think they are, adding in the Brexit party and the other elements, is it then a race to see which one of them dumps their leader first?
I mean, there's no way that Jeremy Corbyn is being dumped anytime soon. Absolutely not.
Even if it's a washout?
It's that, I mean, let's just acknowledge that polling actually shows Labour's going to do pretty well in those Euro elections. That might change, but at the moment, that's what it looks like.
It's ironic, isn't it? We've got two major party leaders who are absolutely determined not to go anywhere. You know, Theresa May, stuck in the mud, effectively squatting in Downing Street, lost umpteen ministers, 30-something ministers, you know, all these councillors now. She will not budge. And Jeremy Corbyn, despite all the horrors that he's had to face as well, you know, his continuing affiliation with terrorist organisations, the anti-Semitism in the Labour Party and so on and so forth, he's stuck in the mud either. And the irony is that whichever party, Labour or Conservatives, ditched their leader and came out with a clear pro-Brexit message would actually clean up at the next general election.
I'm not sure that's true. You know, what's fascinating is this way that in 2017, the two big parties, went right back up to getting, 85% of the vote between the two of them. And that reversing a kind of trend that had been going on for 30 years of diversity and multi-party politics.
But it was because it was a Brexit issue, though, because it was about Theresa May. Are we going to have a Brexit party in power, or are we going to have a Jeremy Corbyn Labour Party that's not committed to Brexit? And I think
their manifesto was committed to Brexit. And they still, after people use on the Labour side,
so
routinely say, 85% of people voted for Brexit remaining parties. I think actually the pathway for any party to a majority now is incredibly, incredibly difficult. We're going to have to get used to coalitions again. And, turns out they weren't very popular.
On the leadership question, could the Lib Dems actually manage to switch in Jo Swinson, for example, before the European election day, 23rd of May?
No, they're going to run a 9-week or longer election campaign after the Euros.
But could she break through then between then and a general election and make that transformative?
I don't think a general election will happen this year, but a new leader could help to sort of build on what Vince Cable's delivered for the Lib Dems over the last 24 hours.
I think it'd be interesting to see actually how the Lib Dems do in the Euros. A little bit of me thinks, I was talking about spoilt ballots earlier. If you don't want to go to the bother of going to the polling station just to spoil your ballot, you stay at home. Yeah. I do wonder if part of the Lib Dems' success has been because traditional Labour and Conservative voters just didn't bother to go out.
I wonder
if your joy is. I'm sure there is a Remain
factor.
issue, but I think it might be a bit premature.
But in the end, all of those people get their seats and they serve in the council and then they act as the foot soldiers for the party. So the exact mechanics of exactly who stayed at home and who wrote what on their ballot paper fundamentally come down to who got elected and how does that change both the narrative
and the activist
space.
In terms of premature joy, that an election in which the Greens and the Change UK party are also contesting and fighting for Remain votes is a gift to Nigel Farage, isn't it?
Well, I suppose it is, yeah, absolutely. I mean, Change UK, they don't seem to have any policies, really. Nigel Farage doesn't have any policies except Brexit, but that is his hallmark. That's what's made him so successful.
High concept party.
A single-issue party. And again, as I say, we will see what happens in 3 weeks' time. But I think if you think last night looked like a bloodbath, my goodness, I think you ain't seen nothing yet.
Let's just, lastly, because time is inevitably limited, but talk about how this fracturing of parties is going to be represented in Parliament. Because, of course, we've seen before, like in the 2015 election when the UKIP vote was nearly 3 million and they ended up with one MP, or the Green vote was about 1 million and they ended up... I mean, is this right? Does this feel right as these votes break down and millions go to other parties, that we're still essentially going to look to one of those two main parties to see if they can get some sort of majority?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends. This whole problem of status and the two main parties not being popular, this depends how Brexit is handled, obviously. When is a deal going to be secured and passed in Parliament? So there's that. But also, I mean, in terms of electoral reform, if we're talking about that and getting rid of first past the post, then I'm not sure who's actually going to push for that and who's going to be in a position to get that through Parliament in any way. Because the AV referendum, we saw how that went.
Yes, it didn't work out brilliantly, did it?
No, I mean, that wasn't for proportional representation, but AV. But yeah, the fundamental challenge is that the only people who could introduce electoral reform are people who can win on the current system. So then it's not in their interests. I think we need to think about other more fundamental changes to how we run our politics.
I'm sorry, we are indeed out of time. Sorry about that, but I'm sure there'll be plenty to discuss on coming editions of Newsnight. That's all we've got time for. Just to correct a statement from Suzanne Evans in that discussion, Jeremy Corbyn isn't affiliated to any terrorist organisation.